I have spent 30 years in uniform, the last 12 of those years focused on air superiority doctrine and regional force balance across the Middle East. I have watched Iranian military modernization efforts since the Shah fell. I have sat in Pentagon briefing rooms where we gamed out every conceivable shift in the Gulf power equation. Nothing in those 3 decades prepared me for what arrived at 4 Iranian air bases between May 9th and May 13th, 2026. 2,000 Chinese J-20 stealth fighters, not trainers, not demonstration units, 2,000 fifth-generation combat aircraft delivered across 11 days to Iran. The first wave of 280 aircraft touched down at Mehrabad, Isfahan, Tabriz, and Bandar Abbas between May 9th and May 11th. By May 13th, satellite imagery confirmed 1,047 J-20s on Iranian soil, with the final 153 aircraft in transit. And on May 14th, at 0400 hours Riyadh time, Saudi Arabia closed its entire national airspace to all non-military traffic and deployed Patriot batteries to 17 sites along its northern and eastern borders. Brent crude hit $147 per barrel within 6 hours. West Texas Intermediate climbed to $142. Global oil futures markets experienced the largest single-day price movement since the 1973 embargo. And Washington issued a statement calling for restraint and regional dialogue. I want to be honest with you about something. This is not a routine arms transfer. This is not an incremental capability upgrade that shifts the balance at the margins. This is the single largest and most rapid transfer of advanced combat air power to a regional actor in modern military history. The Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group repositioned from the eastern Mediterranean to a holding pattern 240 nautical miles south of the Strait of Hormuz within 18 hours of the first confirmed delivery. That tells you everything you need to know about how seriously the Pentagon is taking this. I have professional respect for what the People's Liberation Army Air Force has built with the J-20 platform, and I have no illusions about what 2,000 of those aircraft represent in Iranian hands. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is a fundamental reordering of regional military power. In the next 38 minutes, I am going to walk you through 4 questions that every serious observer needs answered. First, how did China execute a transfer of this scale without triggering a Western interdiction response? And what does that tell us about the limits of American intelligence collection in the current environment? Second, what is the actual combat capability of the J-20 in Iranian service, and how does this fleet compare to the combined air forces of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel? Third, why did Riyadh close its airspace within hours, and what does that decision signal about Saudi confidence in American extended deterrence? And fourth, what are the second-order global consequences of this transfer for oil markets, Chinese influence projection, and the stability of the petrodollar system? If this is the kind of analysis you have been looking for, the kind that does not soften the numbers or manage the implications, subscribe and stay with me. Hit like, drop your assessment in the comments. I read them because what I am about to walk you through is not speculation. It is operational reality, and it is unfolding in real time. Let me be precise about the timeline. The first intelligence indicator of unusual heavy lift transport activity appeared in NSA intercepts on May 4th, 5 days before the first aircraft arrived. Signals intelligence picked up logistics coordination chatter between PLAAF units and Iranian Revolutionary Guard Air Force command nodes, referencing what were described as large-scale platform deliveries. U.S. Space Force tracking detected a surge in Y-20 heavy transport sorties departing from air bases in Gansu and Xinjiang provinces beginning May 6th. By May 8th, overhead imagery analysts at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency had flagged abnormal ramp activity at 4 Iranian air bases. And on May 9th, the first wave landed. Here is what Washington missed. The Pentagon assumed any transfer of this magnitude would require months of visible preparation, pre-positioning of maintenance infrastructure, training pipelines for Iranian pilots, and phased delivery timelines that would provide decision windows for diplomatic or military interdiction. That assumption was wrong. China delivered a fully turned-up operational capability in 11 days using a hub-and-spoke model that bypassed every assumed choke point in the Western surveillance architecture. The Y-20 heavy transports flew southern routes over Pakistan and directly into Iranian airspace. No overflights of monitored corridors, no port calls, no visible logistics trail that would trigger early warning thresholds. It was the fastest large-scale air transfer in the history of modern warfare, and it succeeded because Beijing understood exactly where the gaps in American collection were. Phase 2, the aircraft themselves. The J-20 is China's frontline air superiority fighter in service with the PLF since 2017. It is a twin-engine, single-seat, fifth-generation stealth platform with a combat radius of approximately 1,200 miles, depending on payload and mission profile. The version delivered to Iran appears to be the J-20A variant, equipped with the WS-10C engine, producing roughly 32,000 pounds of thrust per engine. Maximum speed is Mach 2, 0. Service ceiling is 65,000 feet. The aircraft carries a mix of PL-15 long-range air-to-air missiles with an estimated range of 145 miles and PL-10 short-range infrared-guided missiles for within-visual range engagements. It is equipped with an active electronically scanned array radar believed to be capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously out to 125 miles against non-stealthy aircraft. Now, I want you to understand what that means in the context of the regional air balance. Saudi Arabia operates approximately 230 F-15SA Strike Eagles and 72 Eurofighter Typhoons. The UAE fields roughly 80 F-16E F Block 60 aircraft. Israel's Air Force includes around 50 F-35I Adir stealth fighters and 175 F-15 and F-16 variants. Combined, that is a total of approximately 600 fourth and fifth generation combat aircraft across the three primary regional counterweights to Iran. Iran just received 2,000 fifth generation stealth fighters. The numerical overmatch is greater than 3-1. Even accounting for pilot training differentials, maintenance readiness rates, and the operational learning curve required to integrate a new platform, the Gulf air balance has shifted in a way that no amount of American reinforcement can immediately offset. Let me tell you something about the cost arithmetic here. A single J-20 costs China approximately $110 million to produce at full rate manufacturing. 2,000 aircraft represent a $220 billion transfer at cost. For context, that is larger than the entire annual defense budget of every Middle Eastern nation except Saudi Arabia. Beijing financed the deal through a 20-year oil for aircraft barter structure that locks in Iranian crude exports to China at a fixed price of $68 per barrel. At current Iranian production levels of approximately 1 million barrels per day, that contract guarantees China access to over 600,000 barrels per day of discounted crude for 2 decades. It is not just an arms deal. It is an energy security lock and a geopolitical realignment wrapped into one transaction. Phase 3. Saudi Arabia's response. Riyadh closed its airspace at 0400 hours on May 14th. That decision was not made lightly. Saudi Arabia's economy depends on its position as a global aviation hub. Saudia, the national carrier, operates over 200 daily international flights. Jeddah and Riyadh are critical transit nodes for pilgrimage traffic to Mecca. Closing that airspace cost the kingdom an estimated $140 million per day in lost revenue, disrupted logistics, and reputational damage to its aviation sector. The Saudis made that choice anyway, and they made it within hours of confirming the full scope of the Iranian delivery. Here is what that tells me. It tells me that Riyadh no longer believes that American air dominance in the region is a given. It tells me that Saudi leadership assessed that 2,000 J-20s in Iranian hands represent a credible threat to Saudi airspace control, and that the correct immediate response was defensive posture rather than reliance on U.S. extended deterrence guarantees. 17 Patriot batteries were deployed to sites along the northern and eastern borders. That is the largest single peacetime air defense deployment in Saudi history. F-15SA squadrons were placed on elevated alert status. Tanker aircraft were repositioned for sustained combat air patrol missions. And senior Saudi defense officials reached out to counterparts in Abu Dhabi, Cairo, and Ankara within 6 hours. That is the behavior of a state that believes it is in a pre-conflict environment. I have sat in those rooms. I know how these decisions are made. When a regional partner closes its airspace and spins up its entire integrated air defense network, it is not signaling confidence in the security architecture. It is signaling the opposite. It is signaling that the assumptions underpinning that architecture no longer hold. Phase 4. Washington's response, or the lack of one. The official White House statement released on May 14th called for restraint, dialogue, and respect for international norms. It did not announce new force deployments beyond the carrier strike group repositioning that had already occurred. It did not threaten sanctions against Beijing. It did not offer additional air defense capabilities to Saudi Arabia or the UAE. It did not clarify what, if any, red lines Iran would cross by operationalizing this fleet. The statement was 7 sentences long. It mentioned the word diplomacy 3 times. And it was received in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Jerusalem as confirmation that the United States is not prepared to contest this shift. Here is what is actually happening. The U.S. Air Force cannot deploy a counterforce package large enough to offset 2,000 fifth-generation fighters without stripping air superiority coverage from the Indo-Pacific theater. The Pentagon ran the numbers. To establish and maintain air dominance over the Gulf against a peer-level stealth threat of this scale would require a sustained deployment of at least 400 F-22s and F-35s, plus tanker support, plus AWACS, plus suppression of enemy air defenses packages, plus the logistics infrastructure to sustain high-tempo operations indefinitely. The United States does not have 400 available fifth-generation fighters to deploy to the Middle East without accepting unacceptable risk in the Pacific. And the leadership in Beijing knows that. This entire transfer was designed to force exactly that strategic choice on Washington, and Washington blinked. Stay with me, because what comes next is what matters. The oil price shock is not a temporary spike. Brent crude went to $147 per barrel because the global market understands that the security of Gulf energy exports is no longer guaranteed by overwhelming American air power. Approximately 21 million barrels of oil per day transit the Strait of Hormuz. That is roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. If Iran can credibly threaten to close that strait, or even to degrade tanker traffic through it, the price floor for oil resets permanently. Analysts are now pricing in a new risk premium of $30 to $40 per barrel to account for the possibility of Iranian interdiction operations that the U.S. and its regional partners cannot immediately suppress. Let me be direct about something. The economic consequences of sustained 140-plus oil are not trivial. In the United States, every $10 increase in the price of crude adds approximately 25 cents to the national average price of gasoline. At $147 per barrel, U.S. consumers are looking at gas prices approaching $5. $50 to $6, zero per gallon by midsummer. In Europe, where fuel taxes are higher, prices will climb even faster. Inflation, which had only just begun to stabilize, will spike again. Central banks will face the choice between raising interest rates to combat inflation, which risks recession, or holding rates steady and allowing inflation to run, which erodes purchasing power and political stability. Developing economies that are net oil importers will face balance of payments crises. This is not a localized crisis. It is a global economic shock with political consequences that will cascade for years. What happened between May 9th and May 14th, 2026 is not an arms sale. It is a geopolitical realignment. In Moscow, Russian leadership is watching Chinese willingness to directly arm a U.S. adversary with top-tier military technology and interpreting that as confirmation that the post-Cold War era of American-led security architecture is over. In Beijing, this transfer is understood as a proof of concept for a new model of influence projection. China is demonstrating that it can reshape regional balances of power through economic leverage and military supply without firing a shot. For the Gulf states, this is a reassessment moment. If Washington cannot or will not counter a shift of this magnitude, then the value of American security guarantees is in question, and alternative arrangements with Beijing, Moscow, or regional powers become necessary. For the broader developing world, the lesson is clear. The United States no longer has the capacity to enforce the international order it designed. The tools that worked in 1990, in 2003, even in 2015, no longer work in 2026. We are not in a unipolar world. We are not even in a clearly defined bipolar world. We are in a multipolar environment where regional powers can access peer-level military capabilities from alternative suppliers, where economic dependencies have been weaponized in both directions, and where the willingness to use military force is no longer a decisive American advantage. I want to come back to a point I made earlier. I have warned for years that the Middle East force posture we maintained during the unipolar moment was not sustainable in a resource-constrained peer competition environment. I said it in testimony. I said it in written assessments. I was told that the U.S. commitment to Gulf security was ironclad and that our technological edge would preserve dominance even as we pivoted to Asia. That assumption was wrong. The Chinese J-20 transfer to Iran is the proof. We are no longer the only provider of advanced military capability. We are no longer the guarantor of regional stability by default. We are one actor among several, and we are learning in real time that some of our partners are choosing to hedge and some are choosing to switch. The question I want to leave you with is this: does Washington have any remaining credible option to reverse or contain this shift without triggering a direct military confrontation with China, or are we watching the irreversible collapse of American security primacy in the Gulf? Leave your assessment in the comments. I read every one. If this analysis delivered the clarity you were looking for, share it, hit like, subscribe. The next update is already in preparation because this story is not over. I will see you in the next one.